For 11 years, Carol Burnett welcomed America into her living room every Saturday night. She made people cry with laughter. She made careers. She turned sketch comedy into something closer to art. And through all of it, she smiled, warm, generous, completely at ease. But there were people behind that curtain she never wanted to see again. A beloved co-star who slammed a door so hard the entire hallway shook. A Hollywood legend who cornered her at a party and unloaded his fury in front of a crowd. A man she trusted completely who quietly helped himself to everything she had built. Today, we're going inside the relationships Carol Burnett rarely talked about. The feuds she tried to handle privately. The betrayals that cut deeper than anything her writers ever put in a script. And the one man she finally reached her breaking point with, the man she threw off her own show. Section 1. The World Carol Built. 0:30 to 2:30. To understand why these conflicts hurt Carol as deeply as they did, you have to understand what she was actually building. The Carol Burnett Show debuted on CBS in September 1967. At that point in television history, variety shows were considered serious primetime entertainment, but they were almost exclusively hosted by men. Ed Sullivan, Dean Martin, Jackie Gleason, Johnny Carson ruled late night. The idea of a woman anchoring her own weekly variety hour and running it as an executive producer was nearly unheard of. Carol wasn't handed that platform. She fought for it. Her contract with CBS included a clause she had quietly negotiated years earlier that gave her the right to demand a variety show if she chose. When CBS executives initially resisted, believing audiences wouldn't follow a female host week after week, Carol invoked that clause. The network had no choice but to deliver. What she built with that opportunity was something remarkable. The Carol Burnett Show wasn't just a collection of comedy sketches. It was a repertory company, a genuine ensemble where every performer had room to shine. Carol assembled Harvey Korman, Vicki Lawrence, Lyle Waggoner, and eventually Tim Conway into one of the most gifted comedy casts television had ever seen. The atmosphere on set was famously warm. Carol established a tradition of opening every taping with a question-and-answer session with the studio audience. No other variety hosted anything like it. She wanted people to feel like guests rather than spectators. She wanted the show to feel personal because, for her, it genuinely was. That warmth wasn't performance. People who worked on the production for years consistently described Carol as someone who remembered names, who checked in on crew members going through personal difficulties, who made a point of treating everyone on set, from directors to wardrobe assistants, with the same respect. She built a culture of loyalty, and that culture became the foundation of everything the show achieved, which made it all the more devastating when the people she trusted most began to crack that foundation. Section 2. The Cary Grant Dinner. 2:30 to 5 o'clock. By the mid-1970s, The Carol Burnett Show was one of the most-watched programs on American television. Carol herself had become a genuine Hollywood figure, the kind of celebrity who received invitations to the most exclusive gatherings in Beverly Hills. At one of those gatherings, a dinner party hosted at the home of Dinah Shore, Carol found herself seated next to Cary Grant. By any measure, Cary Grant was Hollywood royalty. He had made more than 70 films. Critics considered him one of the finest comic actors in cinema history. And yet, even with her own enormous success, Carol admitted she still felt intimidated sitting beside him. When Grant turned to her and said he enjoyed The Carol Burnett Show, she felt genuinely relieved. The relief didn't last long. Grant told her he loved most of the show, but then steered the conversation toward one recurring segment he absolutely could not stand. He was talking about the family, the sketch featuring Carol as the sharp-tongued Eunice, Harvey Korman as her put-upon husband Ed, and Vicki Lawrence as the unforgettable mama. To a casual viewer, the family might have looked like broad comedy, but Carol considered it some of the most serious dramatic work her cast had ever done. The humor in those sketches didn't come from punchlines. It came from character, from the suffocating weight of disappointment, unspoken resentment, and love buried so deep under years of conflict that nobody in the family could find it anymore. Carol drew on painful personal memories of her own chaotic childhood to shape those characters, and the authenticity showed. Cary Grant hated them. He told Carol the characters were ugly people who did nothing but scream and fight. He said watching them gave him what he called the willies. He couldn't find anything redeeming in them at all. Carol stayed polite. She steered the conversation toward sketches Grant enjoyed and kept the dinner pleasant. But the critique stayed with her long after the night ended. What stung most wasn't simply his personal reaction. It was the larger attitude behind it, the quiet suggestion that her most emotionally honest work was somehow unpleasant rather than insightful. That the characters she had spent years developing, characters that had already transformed Vicki Lawrence into a star and would eventually inspire an entirely separate series called Mama's Family, were nothing more than unpleasant noise. She understood where that attitude came from. For a certain generation of Hollywood, television comedy was a lesser art form. Sketch performers were entertainers. Film actors were artists. That divide never fully disappeared during Carol's career, and that dinner table conversation was one of the clearest expressions of it she ever encountered. Section 3. The Price of Parody. 5 to 8 o'clock. If Cary Grant's criticism was delivered privately over dinner, the backlash Carol faced for her celebrity parodies played out in a much more public and sometimes humiliating arena. Parody was one of Carol's sharpest tools. She understood intuitively that audiences loved watching their favorite Hollywood images turn slightly ridiculous. Her most famous single sketch moment, appearing as Scarlett O'Hara in a gown made from actual curtain rod, has been replicated and referenced countless times in the decades since. The bit worked because it was absurd, but was also affectionate. Carol never mocked her subjects from a place of contempt. She mocked the myths around them. Not every subject saw it that way. Joan Crawford had, at various points, expressed admiration for Carol and enjoyed her work. That changed after Carol performed a parody connected to Crawford's Film Torch song. Through Hollywood social circles, Carol eventually heard that Crawford felt the impression had gone too far, that it was unnecessarily mean and had crossed into genuine cruelty. Understanding Crawford's reaction requires understanding the specific position aging actresses occupied in Hollywood during that era. For women who had built careers on glamour and commanding authority, comedy was not a gentle thing. Glamour required distance. It required mystique. Once the public laughed at you, not admiringly, but at the version of you that had been exaggerated into absurdity, that distance collapsed. The mystique didn't survive it. Crawford had spent decades constructing her image. Every role, every public appearance, every photograph was part of a deliberate self-creation. Watching Carol amplify her mannerisms for laughs in front of millions of viewers reportedly felt like a private humiliation made public on an enormous scale. Carol was disappointed by the reaction, though she understood it. She had never believed her parodies were cruel. They were, in her mind, a form of tribute. But she recognized that for certain stars, the boundary between affectionate exaggeration and mockery was impossible to see clearly once you were the subject being examined. The Doris Day situation carried a different kind of sting. Carol frequently spoofed the screen partnership between Day and Rock Hudson because their breezy, cheerful chemistry was so universally recognizable, it practically invited imitation. Hudson reportedly laughed at the sketches and bore no ill will. Day, according to Carol, did not appreciate them nearly as much. Carol later said she had been told that Doris simply didn't get a big kick out of it. That mattered to Carol because Day represented something she genuinely respected, a woman who had built enormous success in an industry that rarely made things easy for female performers. Having Day feel targeted rather than honored by the parody bothered her in a way that hostility from a less admired star simply wouldn't have. But the most openly aggressive confrontation came after Carol's spoof love story. The 1970 film had been a cultural phenomenon. Ryan O'Neal and Ollie McGraw had become stars almost overnight, and the movie's melodramatic emotional intensity made it an irresistible target for parody. Carol's version played the sentimentality of the film to its most theatrical extreme, and audiences found it hilarious. Ryan O'Neal did not. According to Carol, he confronted her at a Hollywood party. He didn't pull her aside discreetly or express his objections privately. He cornered her and complained loudly about the sketch, specifically attacking the actor who had portrayed him in the bit. The confrontation was aggressive, public, and deeply uncomfortable. Carol had faced criticism before, but something about the way O'Neal handled it, the entitlement behind the assumption that a comedy performer owed him immunity from satire, revealed the double standard she had been navigating her entire career. Male comedians had always built careers lampooning powerful figures. When Carol did it with equal fearlessness, certain stars treated it as a personal offense. She never softened her approach to please them. Section 4. Harvey Korman. 8 to 1300 hours. Of all the relationships that defined the Carol Burnett Show, none seemed more unbreakable than the one between Carol and Harvey Korman. Their chemistry was the kind that television rarely produces more than once in a generation. Harvey's face was a magnificent instrument, capable of registering 17 shades of barely suppressed hysteria in the space of a single reaction shot. He broke character constantly. He laughed when he wasn't supposed to laugh, and those unscripted moments of genuine amusement became some of the most beloved in the show's history. Audiences didn't just love what Harvey did. They loved watching him fail to hold himself together. Behind that chemistry was a man Carol genuinely cared about. She had fought for Harvey. She had helped negotiate his salary and defended his creative instincts to network executives. When people outside the production questioned his value, Carol made the case for him clearly and without hesitation, which made what happened in the early 1970s all the more painful to witness. The trouble began quietly, the way most serious trouble does. People on set started noticing changes in Harvey's behavior that were easy to write off at first: a shorter temper during rehearsals, occasional moodiness, an edge in his voice that hadn't been there before. Over time, those changes became harder to dismiss. Harvey was going through the collapse of his marriage to actress Donna Acton, a union that had lasted nearly 2 decades. The personal pain was real and understandable, and many people on the production were genuinely sympathetic. But the behavior it produced on set was becoming increasingly difficult to absorb. He snapped at guest star Petula Clark during rehearsal after she offered a minor suggestion, turning a routine creative moment into a humiliating confrontation in front of the full cast and crew. He mocked Lyle Waggoner. He erupted at wardrobe staff over costume decisions that would previously have been resolved in minutes. The atmosphere that Carol had spent years carefully cultivating, the warmth, the creative safety, the mutual respect, was being corroded by someone she had trusted to help protect it. Carol tried to handle things privately. She spoke to Harvey directly. She gave him room. She understood personal pain because she had navigated plenty of her own, and she didn't want to respond to his suffering with punishment. But there is a point in any professional relationship where accommodation becomes enabling, and Carol was approaching it. The breaking point came during a rehearsal in October of that year. Harvey arrived clearly having had a very difficult night before. He had missed script revisions earlier in the week. Crew members were watching the situation closely enough that some had begun placing private bets on how long things could continue this way. After another heated exchange during rehearsal, Carol walked to Harvey's dressing room. She wasn't going there to fire him. She was going to try one more time to calm things down and find a way through. He didn't give her the chance. He lashed out at her and slammed the door with enough force that props reportedly rattled in the hallway outside. For Carol, that was it. She had protected the production through years of external pressure. She had fought networks, managed egos, negotiated contracts, and kept a complex creative enterprise running with a professionalism that most producers twice her age would have struggled to match. The show carried her name. The culture of the show reflected her values. And she was not going to allow someone she had defended and supported for 7 seasons to behave as though her authority meant nothing. She contacted Harvey's agent that same day and made it clear he would not be returning after that evening's taping. The news stunned nearly everyone connected to the show. Harvey had become so identified with the program that the idea of the Carol Burnett Show without Harvey Korman felt almost unimaginable. Audience members wrote letters. Industry insiders expressed disbelief. Over the weekend, Carol sat with a decision. She knew Harvey was suffering. She knew that his behavior, as damaging as it had become, was coming from real pain rather than malice. And she knew, if she was honest with herself, that losing him would change the show in ways that couldn't fully be predicted. So she reached out with an offer. He could come back. But the condition was simple and absolute. He had to leave whatever he was carrying outside the door when he walked onto that set. The production and everyone in it deserved that. Monday morning arrived. The cast and crew waited. Then Harvey appeared in the hallway, whistling loudly and skipping with a theatrical exaggeration that made his absurdity unmistakable. Carol watched him for a moment and then started laughing. The tension broke. He stayed. Years later, Harvey spoke openly about that confrontation. He said he respected Carol more after she stood up to him than he ever had before. There's something in that worth sitting with. The idea that what actually deepened their bond wasn't the laughter they shared on camera, but the moment Carol made absolutely clear that she would not accept being treated as though she didn't matter. When Harvey died in 2008 at the age of 81, Carol delivered a tribute that acknowledged both sides of their relationship with complete honesty. The conflict had hurt them, but it had also, in the end, shown both of them what the relationship was actually made of. Section 5, The Private Losses. 13 to 1600 hours. What audiences saw every Saturday night was Carol Burnett making comedy look easy. What they didn't see was the weight she carried home after the cameras stopped. Her marriage to producer Joe Hamilton, which had produced 3 daughters and seemed from the outside like a stable partnership between two people who built something extraordinary together, was disintegrating. The collapse wasn't clean or simple. According to later accounts, Carol discovered that Joe had quietly taken control of valuable business assets connected to her work without fully disclosing what he was doing. When the divorce became a legal matter, disputes over syndication rights and financial interests that Carol had believed were hers turned into a prolonged and deeply personal battle. For Carol, the divorce wasn't simply the end of a marriage. It was the discovery that someone she had trusted with her professional life, as well as her personal life, had used that trust in ways that couldn't be explained away. The combination of those 2 losses, happening simultaneously, was a specific kind of devastation. But even that was overshadowed by what her family went through with addiction. Carol had grown up watching her parents be consumed by alcoholism. She understood from childhood what that disease did to people and to the families built around them. When her eldest daughter Carrie began struggling with drug addiction as a teenager, Carol didn't look away from the problem or hope it would resolve on its own. She intervened. She forced Carrie into treatment. And Carrie hated her for it. For a period, the relationship between them was broken almost beyond recognition. Carrie didn't want to be helped. She wanted her mother to trust her, and Carol's insistence on treatment felt like a refusal of that trust. The anger between them was real, and it lasted.